3 sections, so based on what we have in front of us right now. The cost component came to $960 for 80 copies. Generally, these would be kept in the classrooms, but students would take them home as needed for various reading assignments or in-class assignments, whatever the case might be. And as you can imagine, this might be fodder for things like Socratic seminar discussions and things like that, where we want to talk about bigger issues in that class. One of the other items that we had discussed, Mrs. Gordienko and I had discussed, was it's a softback, it's a paperback, which, as you can imagine, from an economic point of view, is fabulous. And also from the point of view that there may be a new edition in 2 or 3 years, and if we decide to go with a textbook, a heavy hardback textbook, you're talking $80, $90, possibly $100 an issue, and well, you get my point. So this is something that we can upgrade pretty easily and economically, and still serve our purposes along with the existing text. So, any questions?
Anyone have any questions?
I have an off-topic question, so if anyone else has any on-topic questions first.
Well, it's sort of, I mean, it is a 2014 book, so I'm just sitting here thinking, you betcha they're gonna have a new.
Yeah, there was
More to say about
a
journalism.
runner-up called.
Yeah.
I'll put your glasses on. The Principles and Practices of Journalism, but that one had a lot of overlap with the existing text. So we'd be getting this much information that we would want, and then we'd get a lot of overlap information. Equally credible, good information, and it was a little bit more on the price point, but we feel this will that's our needs.
Do we have any idea when to expect a new edition to come out, since it is?
I asked the, I spoke to the rep from the, and they really don't have an idea. That's,
So
I guess
they're
in the
not
model-
working on it and planning on releasing it.
In their model, there's somewhere when they look for consumer demands. The good news about this is that these are the elements of journalism in like ethics and pieces like that. Things that don't necessarily have to be updated every 6 months or something like that. Philosophical concerns, the purpose of journalism, First Amendment.
Yeah.
Pretty much stays stable. I think to update a book, you just want to give it new context. Associated with examples.
I just glanced through the first or second chapter about the truth in journalism. Looked good.
And it's again, we understand that even though we have 80 kids in this class, we're not going to probably not going to put out 80 journalists from the class of 2019 and 2020. But these skills, these writing skills, these skills of discernment and navigation and the other pieces there are essential, for every student.
Right,
It's
it's
there.
for the consumption too, right?
Absolutely, as wise consumers as well of information.
And I can say that I've learned that they've updated this curriculum because I've already had 8 journalism interviews around topics from these students who are writing their research paper around. And it's an interesting process because they have to do all of the research and develop their questions ahead of time, which means they're walking in with some level of expertise around a topic. And I've been all over the gamut in terms of the things that I've spoken with the students. And then they use interviews, and it's more than one. I've been one of their interviews of 2 or 3 people that they then incorporate our thoughts and their research into a final paper. So my only requirement for the 8 students was you must send me the final when it's done, because I want to see what it looks like. So I've received 2 of the 8 thus far, and it's a really fascinating topic in terms of the way they weave in what I say and what a teacher says and what their parents say, or whatever their 3 interview topics were around that, as well as the research. The only other question I have, Dr. Scheid, is just to confirm that this is a budgeted amount, and that this is not over and above the program improvement budget, and this is part of the budget that was anticipated, so the money is sitting there for these.
Well, it will be, so as we build the program
Correct.
improvement proposal budget, it would. And at this point, we have one more program improvement proposal that actually Mr. Chaputi will be bringing in January for being a writer for grade 6.
Okay.
The total, including that, is $286,676, which is actually below program improvement over the last at least 3 years.
Well done.
And
Budget is good.
And I've heard that you can thank a specific teacher for all of your interviews, because after one student asked and got the answer of yes, the teacher shared that with everyone, because the teacher was so excited that the superintendent said yes to an interview. So then all the kids knew, and all the kids were like, oh, I'm gonna ask him too.
That's what I learned.
It happens.
Some of them they ask.
That's true.
It's been wonderful to get to know some students.
So my kind of off the topic, somewhat off the topic question, other than it's a writing question, so it kind of applies. I've worked with a bunch of different high school kids, and I was a high school kid through here. So one of the skills that I'm not seeing consistently is kids knowing how to change the wording of their sentences so that they're not saying I throughout the whole entire paper. And I've seen that so consistently, and I know that I didn't really learn that skill during my time in high school. It wasn't until I was in college that I learned that skill. And I'm wondering, but it's a skill that you should have already, right? And so I'm just wondering, is there somewhere where we're making sure that we're building that into the curriculum, where we're teaching kids how to do that, where we're teaching them how to flip their sentences and reword them so that it's not starting with the same word?
Yeah, it's not not a how question, it's a who question. It's who you're writing. Who's your audience? And that's, and kids should be given the opportunity to write by. But they also need to understand that if they're writing an email to the superintendent to ask for his time, they probably need to be a little more formal with it. They can probably still use I, but it needs to sound a little more formal.
Well, I didn't mean they shouldn't use I at all, but when you have 10 sentences in a row that all start with I, to change it up, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and we've talked as a department about very specific techniques to change the structure of a sentence, so you're not maybe starting every sentence not only with I, but starting with any pronoun.
Right.
Or now, starting a sentence, switch it around and try to start with something else, a positive phrase or something like that. So we have had those discussions, and as we look at building our curriculum over the next couple of years, writing is obviously going to play a major component, and the how-to of writing is certainly important to us.
Well, I'm putting in a special request for that skill.
We get special requests.
All this time I can say
Thank you.
After all this time I've been sitting here, I didn't know I could put in my special.
An email? Who's got the clicker?
I got the glass, right?
That's a clicker.
Go ahead. Right in front.
Transitioning the clicker.
Oh.
I'll give an overview as you're loading up the PowerPoint for me. Thank you. If you remember, a month ago, we had a pretty significant presentation on class rank, GPA, and some grading topics specifically at the high school. There was a great level of agreement around many of the topics, but there was some feedback around some of the other topics where there was some mixed feedback from that standpoint. So from a standpoint of where we were, at the end of that presentation in November 2018, here were the ideas moving forward. And so this was kind of the culmination of the end of the presentation, all of these items we had discussed, and suggested that in these areas, these were the areas that we were looking in terms of recommendation and gathering feedback. There was feedback at that meeting from many of you. There was feedback from some board members after the meeting from a standpoint of email, as well as there was parent feedback both at that meeting, as well as there were 3 emails I received between that meeting and basically a couple days afterwards. We were that week supposed to meet with the high school teachers and counselors. We got snowed out, so we then did that after the Thanksgiving break. We have had that meeting with the high school teachers and counselors to do the exact same presentation for them. So we didn't change the presentation for the teachers and the counselors because we wanted their feedback on the same information, although we did provide some of the feedback that had been given at this meeting and from the parents to see whether it didn't match where they were. We received feedback at that meeting, as well as I received 2 staff emails after the meeting to provide their feedback, that they wanted to do it after they had reviewed some information. Around the level of where there was some conversation, it really had to do with two pieces. It had to do with class rank, and it had to do with the recognition of students specific to class rank, because obviously one does dovetail with the other. If the recommendation is to not do class rank, that then changes what the recognition looks like, because it doesn't exist from a standpoint of being public and things like that. So where we are, the committee then met again to kind of take a look at that feedback, and we're suggesting that we stay consistent with the items that are in black. They are all the items that do not involve recognition and class rank, and that we are changing our recommendation to suggest that class rank change to be calculated off of the new GPA. And so currently there are two GPAs. There is the GPA that I would say is calculated using the weighted course average, and that is a pretty standard college, high school GPA, the way most people would calculate it using a weighted system. There then is the divisor that is utilized in Penridge, specific to then recalculating the GPA, and that is how rank is determined. The recommendation is to do away with that divisor and to only have one cumulative GPA that is based off a weighted scale that would be used to calculate class rank. So students would continue to be ranked, but there would only be the one GPA that we are used to calling the weighted GPA that goes there. And then obviously if we're going to have rank, we will continue to recognize rank. And as I said at that meeting, the whole concept around recognition and what that looks like at graduation is a separate presentation for later in the school year, because those aren't things that are policy issues. These are things that are, some of these are policy issues that we will have to present to the policy committee in 2019. All right, so that is our suggestion in terms of what that looks like in terms of the changes. Everything else, which there was approval and support for, both in this setting as well as with the teachers, are the items that are still in black. I'm going to read them just to make sure you don't have any questions about them, but we had spoke about them a month ago. One is moving to a cum laude system. One is adding a plus or minus weighted grading system, so there will be B pluses and B minuses. Currently there are just Bs, so anywhere from an 80 to an 89 is all of the same from a GPA standpoint. We are suggesting moving away from that. Talked about awarding honors credits for some college courses. Currently college courses do not impact your GPA. You do get credit for them, but they do not impact your GPA calculation. They're like an audit course that some of you would be familiar with. We are suggesting that we use honors credit for college courses that are in content areas, and to use non-weighted courses for those that are elective. And so that would match with our departments here, and where we primarily have honors weighting and non-honors weighting in many of our elective courses. The inclusion of decile information for the graduating class on the school profile, that's simply to provide another level of communication, because as was mentioned tonight, 4.4 is not the same in every school district. And so it does at least allow to tell you within what decile range is 4.4 and where within that range does it fall. Obviously the class rank would give you a specific number, but it does give you a sense for what our grading scale looks like. Obviously the continuation of a senior academic achievement event, which is already occurring in the spring, as well as then the policy recommendations that we're talking about. When we then took this slide and matched it to timeline recommendations, this is what the slide looked like in November, in terms of the things that would be impacted for next year, as well as the things that would be impacted for current juniors as well as current freshmen. With the change in the recommendation, this is what it changes to. No suggested change in terms of for next year. The items listed in next year have equal impact. Some of them have no impact on students, they're just recognition items, like cum laude. So for this year, cum laude, the decimal information, as well as the policy information that will have to come in the spring. For next year, which means anyone who's a current junior or younger in the school system, that we move to the plus minus, as well as the change to the college courses, that some be weighted, some not. And then for the current freshmen, would be the elimination of the divisor in calculating GPA, because that does truly change the rules for students. Ninth grade schedules are fairly similar in terms of the options for honors and the lack of options for AP. And so they're more alike than different in 10th, 11th, and especially 11th and 12th grade. There are lots of diverging paths in terms of weighted courses. And so the thought was to change that for the current freshmen, And then obviously the other two items were eliminated, and I just put it up there for a standpoint to say nothing would change from a class rank and recognition from that standpoint in terms of what that would look like. Are there any questions about the information that's up there? We'll just base it off of this slide because it's the same information that was changed from earlier. The only other piece of feedback that was discussed at this meeting last month was regarding tech school students. Tech school students currently benefit from the divisor because they routinely take more than 6 credits a year because they're in tech school. And so between what they're required to do to graduate in tech school, they routinely have 7 credits is common for tech school students. And so often their rank had been increased based on that divisor, and so there was some concern about this hurting tech school students. And so the question was, should some levels of tech school be weighted? Should there be a weight awarded to year 3 or year 4, or both year 3 and year 4, or all the years? In terms of that feedback, Dr. Scheid has begun a conversation with the administration at tech school to get their feel. I'm also addressing it tomorrow with the other 2 superintendents that feed into the Upper Bucks Tech School, since it wouldn't just impact in terms of our change. They would have some ripples there at both Palisades and Quakertown. And so that will be part of our policy recommendation next year in 2019, but we are not ready to make that recommendation tonight in terms of what we are suggesting. But it obviously would not come into play for a while anyway, in terms of not changing the rules for tech school students. And so we'll talk about that in policy in early 2019.
Board members have any questions?
I have a comment. I think that we have used the term incorrectly consistently. That is the class rank term. It should be class rank index, which is what it was proposed as, okay, and what it was used as, and that is something different. And it was implemented in part, that the divisor, as you call it, to encourage students to take more credits and to discourage students from sitting in a study hall. And I don't see anything in this proposal that that benefits that part of it, in my opinion. I still think it's a bad choice. I know students may like being in study halls and text messaging or whatever they're doing, or doing their homework and so forth, but I think, frankly, their day should be busy when they're here at the high school. I think it's important that they study different things and as many things as they can possibly jam into their schedules. And I know many do, but not all. And once this change is made, I think that will revert to more trying to put aside time for study halls and concentrating just on the classes, say the 4 or 6 AP classes, so that they can, so they'll play the game differently, but they'll still play the game, is my opinion.
And you know that I completely agree with you in terms of what the motivation is, and it should be for all of our students, not just the ones who might be playing a game to get to a certain part of the scale. That all of our students should be encouraged to take multiple courses and not be sitting in study halls. And so it is something that we're talking in terms of other policies that could be addressed, that would help that situation that you're speaking to, that obviously do not fall on here, but our policy recommendations to try to eliminate some of that withdrawal or whatever that would be that you're anticipating.
The other comment I have is concerning the calculation of the GPA, or the class rank index for that matter, that we should be, especially those of us who have a mathematical background, should be very conscious of what the significant figures are. Currently, we award grades that have one significant figure. 4.8, 4.0, 4.5, or whatever. We're going to go to a system that will have 2 significant figures if this is adopted. But we calculate our class rank or class rank index or GPA to 3 or 4 significant figures. To me, that's wrong. We should have more ties, which it will create, but then they would be mathematically accurate.
And if you remember from last month, the recommendation is to move to 2 significant digits in terms of the calculation of class rank. And so that the GPA would go to 2 digits and the class rank would use that number, and we would round using conventional rounding to do that. Yep.
So then how would you determine the order if you had 5 ties?
They would be announced announced as tied. So if they are tied for second, because that would be the only place where obviously you're addressing, they would all be announced as second in the class. And that is possible, although it is unlikely at the top end. It is more likely in the center where you have lots of people tied for 110th, or whatever that number is, because there are more common GPAs in the middle than there are at the top or the bottom. But that is possible in
And then
terms
are you
of
gonna
the
have
numbers.
those 5 walk alphabetically?
So we will address that situation when we have the opportunity to address that situation, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Are we doing any comments tonight?
We'll have a cage match.
No.
Do we have comments?
So,
Questions?
Do we
comments?
comment?
at the end, there will be an opportunity for that.
Okay, I just have a question.
Thank you.
Now we're on to the Senate Bill 1095, graduation option presentation with Dr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mrs. Khan. So, I'm sure everybody's aware of the graduation requirement for Keystone exams and passing the Keystone exams. It's still a requirement that students take the exam, but there has been a lot of conversation, and there was a Senate House Bill, Bill 1095, signed into law, and I really wanted to give you some context about how that started, where we are, and what we still don't know. So there are options. I'll go through those, but there is information that still isn't clear, and I want to make you all aware of that. So the bill was sponsored by Senator Tom McGarrigle, a Republican from Delaware, and what he was saying was he was emphasizing that the passage of the measure continues the important work of establishing a more thoughtful approach to high state testing and graduation requirements. Keystone exams shouldn't be the sole factor in determining graduation because they do not measure the range of aptitude needed to be successful in college or the workplace. So that's really the context of what this Senate bill was about. It was about giving options to students who may not be passing these Keystone exams, and we have been dealing with it as every other high school has dealt with it. Students who do not pass and what options they have. So what you see on the screen are 4 options. And they get kind of complicated. I'm not going to go through every single piece of this, and this is why. Because I attended a meeting on Friday, and we were told PDE wants us to say this statement about graduation requirement, right? Because now we need to say, while what I tell you here is a summary of Act 158, the details, of course, will rest with the implementation regulations as provided by PDE. PDE has informed IUs that guidance and timelines for the implementation are still being developed. Specifically, PDE asked that the following information be shared with school districts. The Office of Elementary and Secondary Education program staff are working with working with the PDE legal team to interpret the requirements for implementation and will release guidance as soon as we can responsibly and accurately do so. At this time, LEAs, the school districts, may continue to follow their currently enacted local graduation policy. So while we were very excited to be able to share this, we were told to tell you to give you that statement. But the good news is options are better than no options. So, for example, I'm just going to briefly go over them, knowing that we haven't gotten the guidelines, and also knowing the expenses that will be involved. So the fiscal impact of this, so the Department of Ed has indicated it will need additional staff to administer the provisions of this bill at the estimated cost of $125,000 annually. In addition, the department estimates a one-time cost of $75,000 for information technology changes. Finally, the department will need to hire a contractor to determine the standard setting for assessments at an estimated cost of $250,000. So just wanted to give you the context of all of this. So that said, the options, you pass the test, that's great. One of the options then would be a composite score on all 3 of the exams. So the algebra, the lit, the bio. The students would have to have at least 1 proficient and nothing under basic. So 2 basic and a proficient. You could pass that way. The student, the option 2 requirements, pass a course associated with the Keystones, and it's not determined what the score would be yet, but a certain score on a standardized test, or successful completion of a college level course in that particular academic content associated with the Keystone, or acceptance to an accredited 4-year nonprofit institution of higher ed. Option 3, which is what we do now, this is for our students who attend the tech school, pass a class in the content area, pass the NOCTI, an industry-based competency test, and we currently have that in place for our students who go to the tech school, so there's nothing different there. And option number 4 would be pass the course associated with the exam, and then in addition to that, 3 pieces of evidence that reflect readiness for post-secondary engagement consistent with the student's career goals, and or acceptance to an accredited 4-year institution, or the second option of a letter guaranteeing full-time employment. So the big picture is the understanding that the Keystone isn't the end-all. A single test score isn't going to tell anybody whether or not they're going to be successful in college or career, and that they're expanding the options. And I think it's a respectful thing to do for students. So while there's still glitches in here and we don't know the final answer on all this, the good news is that there are options for our students. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. And as I get further information, I'll provide it